Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to Bridging the Gap, a series where we tackle difficult and controversial topics Muslims deal with across generational divides. We provide a safe space for Muslims of all ages to openly discuss these issues and share their stories to foster community, overcome widespread challenges, and provide insight and education to non-Muslims about Islam. My name is Kassidy Demaio, and I'm the Operations Manager at the Lighthouse Project in Cary, North Carolina. I'll be one of your hosts alongside my coworker, Mohsen Zakaib.
Hey, Assalamu everybody. My name is Mohsen Zakaib, and I am the Programs Manager at the Lighthouse Project. We're really excited for our first episode, and I think we have a wonderful topic for our first episode to get started. We will focus today on youth Muslim immigrant identity. And I can sit here and kind of try to explain the topic, but I guess that's what the podcast is about, right? So I'll let our esteemed guests do the explaining.
So first, I would like to introduce Omar Rezk. Omar comes from many worlds and is an expert at weaving them together. Egyptian-born, raised in North Carolina, he blends the hospitality and cultural depth of the Middle East with the curiosity and creative expression of the American spirit. He currently lives in Houston, Texas, brought there as a trained scientist to work for a biotech company. During his time here, he built Kahwa Coffee, a company that caters to all kinds of communities through the delicious coffee and an education about where it comes from. Omar is a natural community builder, a weaver of worlds, ideas, and people. He uses his passion for food and farming as a catalyst to bring people to the table.
And it is my pleasure to introduce Amal Kassir. Amal is a Syrian-American poet, born and raised in Denver, Colorado, to an Arab father and an American convert mother. So you can already see she has a very diverse background. She has performed and taught in 13 countries and cities all over the world in venues ranging from orphanages to refugee camps to youth prisons to churches. At the University of Colorado, Denver, she designed her own undergraduate major titled Community Programming in Social Psychology. That's so cool. I just want to say that's amazing. Where she has been able to create programs for a range of causes and people. She is currently a youth mentor, a writing teacher, and a traveling poet. She is also the program manager of the mental wellness program for youth, for Muslim youth for positive impact in Colorado, working to dismantle the stigma around mental health in the Muslim community. So welcome.
I just want to say thank you to you guys. Yeah, thank you to you guys for coming today. We're really looking forward to learning from you and giving you a space to share your stories. So let's kick it off. So the first question is a very loaded question, and in keeping with controversy, I feel like it's a good one to start off with. Where are you guys from?
Omar, do you want to start?
Sure. First of all, thank you guys for having us. It's an honor to be here and support the Lighthouse Project and their mission of expanding to the community and giving this to the community. This podcast series, I really think is going to be have a great impact, inshallah. So where am I from? Where's Omar from? You're right. That's a very loaded question. I was born in Egypt. My family immigrated to the U.S. when I was just 2 years old. So although I did have my Egyptian passport, most of my upbringing happened in the U.S. We grew up in a small town called Hurdle Mills in North Carolina, 2,000 people. We were one of a kind. We were truly aliens in this nation, surrounded by country folk and on all sides, just no one really knew who we were. So we had to kind of express our own identities from the inside. But I grew up in North Carolina. Durham was another base for me. The streets of Durham were part of like where I grew up. Inside the masjid was where I found my home. The kids like me, the kids with immigrant identities, families coming from overseas, but trying to find a place for them here in this country was difficult. And having a home base in the masjid and giving us an opportunity to be friends there and connect on our differences was a really beautiful thing. So I think that really shaped who I was and who I became. You kind of said it in my intro, but I do see myself as a weaver. I think of all these different sides of myself: the farmer, the coffee guy, the people know me as the scientist. All these different things I try to incorporate into myself, and I think what I really get to express through all of them is my own interest and quest for like finding the source of all things, the crux of the matter. And I think that defines who I am, in I guess a more poetic way, is that I'm always after the source. And when it comes to identity, that can be a little bit complicated. Clearly, I'm going off on a tangent here about who I am, and it's hard to kind of define it. But I think, inshallah, with the questions in this podcast, we'll kind of crack that open a little bit more.
It was very poetic, and I think I have a similar journey when it comes to answering the question of where I'm from. And I actually went so far as taking the genetic test. I have a father who's from Syria, and he immigrated here in the early 80s. And my mother is from Iowa. She's a Midwestern girl, I think third generation German. And her father was kind of unclear where exactly he was from. So I dove in, I spat inside the tube, and they mapped it all out. And I am from, on both sides of my lineage, gardens. I'm from orchards. I'm from peach orchards in Iowa and apricot orchards in Syria. I have a line in a poem. I'm neither here nor there, neither east nor west. My father's from the Middle East and my mom's from the Midwest. And I was born where the prairie meets the Rocky Mountains. It's this constant blending. It's this constant fusion. And I think that, like, whenever an Uber driver would ask me where I was from, I would just go straight to my parents' story and like skip over my whole Colorado hood. I would skip over like what I was actually made out of. And lately, the journey inward into this bloodline, into just like who we were, has also been this exploration of like, what did my grandfather and my grandfather's grandfather do for a living? Who were these people? What did they pray for? How did we come here as these like American Muslim kids? And what of our ancestors makes us who we are? So I haven't figured out the entirety of the question, but I've got like Germany on deck soon to just like go and see what's there, if there's anything. And it's a really interesting fusion. I want to just throw out there that the same area that my mother is from, my white, blonde hair, green-eyed mother, in Germany, is one of the cities that the Syrian refugees ended up back to. So it's like this like crazy full circle that really, I mean, I don't know, it sounds serendipitous to me, or maybe something deeper than that. Yay.
No, wow, that is really interesting. That's very cool, and I think very well spoken. I think that was beautiful. Tying it back to your poetry. Yeah, wow.
And we kind of knew this was a hard question for any Muslim immigrant, or for any immigrant for that matter, right? It's a very difficult question to ask, and sorry we started off with that. The first question that has no answer, right? But let's move on to our second question. Maybe this could kind of delve more, and as Omar put it, crack the shell of who we are as an identity. So how do you guys navigate your unique identities, whether that's in social interactions and professional interactions, even your social media presence? If you could speak a little bit about that.
Amal, I'll let you take this one.
I think that like the biggest aspects of my personality, like the speaker part of me, I think it really developed when I was waitressing at my dad's restaurant for 6 years. And this was I got my hijab on, so I would get the question all the time, is that your uniform? And we straight up, like, we had an IDF, an Israeli soldier, come in with like his full attire, his full uniform on before. We had all kinds of people because we were in a very, very white part of town. So I think that like my whole identity, I went to a private Islamic school growing up, so very sheltered from the world. But this restaurant really gave me access to the reality, one, that there are so many people, and two, they really love good food and good stories. And yeah, and it was so profound because I would navigate my social interactions by telling some profound story about the war in Syria and then like dropping a tray of water on the guy at table 6, you know? So like you had the most human parts of you infused with the most like poetic of realities and stories. And it really also mandated that like at the end of the day, my mom is white. And you see a lot of times in the immigrant communities that like, you know, there's like there's just like white people. We talk about white people so much, but my mom was white. And so I would look into the eyes of my customers and I'd have to see myself in them. And this is how it looked like when I was out in the world. And with social media, same thing. Like I try to like, my mom converted to Islam. This is not an exclusive religion. And Kassir, I'm sure you know, so you know, I think like just like I try to make sure that I am not just for the Arabs, I am not just for the Muslims, but this is a way of life. And my Muslim identity, my Muslim woman identity in particular, is the one that I feel like is my biggest driver when I'm out there in the world. It's the one people see firsthand. It's on all the news, it's being discussed all the time. But it's the one that like lets me embrace the full scope of the human experience and like bring this tradition into it. So yeah, it's tricky. And all my siblings, people usually like, they're like, oh, you guys are Syrian. And then they see us like listening to like Blink 182 and the Doors and stuff. And they're like, oh my God, you guys are definitely half white. It's very clear. So even with the family, it's really cool, really fascinating dynamics. So I don't know if we navigated right, but we navigated.
I really like what you said there about just like being out in the world and realizing that the two different sides of us, even, you know, my blood is completely Egyptian, you know, but you know, we are what we eat. I've been living in America most of my life, and I've been drinking the water here, I've been eating the food here, and I think my DNA has changed. Not just on a spiritual level, not just on a personal and social level, but literally I think what I will be able to pass down to my children, inshallah, that I think part of it, it's definitely American, right? And you know, growing up as a kid is definitely being surrounded by people who are not like us. You know, all of our neighbors were white, everyone was country, everyone was redneck, everyone was just Carhartt jackets and lifted trucks. And for me, it was just so different because I didn't have that kind of upbringing, but I was surrounded by it. And I felt the need to like fortify myself against it, as if this is something that will infiltrate and change who I am supposed to be. And so there's a lot of resistance growing up, you know, a lot of just like cordialness, just a lot of friendliness with everybody. I could navigate any social interaction because I wasn't like anybody else. So I had to learn how to talk to everybody in their own way. And for me, there's so much misunderstanding growing up. You know, I'm the only Muslim boy in my school from kindergarten to 12th grade, right? And that's a tough reality in a small town of 2,000 people, where the only three things that people know is white, black, and Mexican. You know, half the time I was Mexican. You know, I'm definitely not white, and I'm definitely not black. So you must be Mexican, and that's how people treated me sometimes. And people just come up and straight up talk to me in Spanish, and so then I'd have to respond. You know, sometimes I'd respond in Arabic, and they'd be like, "Wait, what's going on? What are you?" So I think it became really important to recognize who it was that was around me. And I think putting myself in all these different situations and different interactions with people on a social level, you start to understand where you stand in the world, where you are in the world, and where you are within yourself. And I did put up a lot of like blockades. You know, I refused to listen to country music because that was what was around me. And I was like, no, that's not going to infiltrate. I refused to adopt the Southern accent. I refused it. And not because of anything, but that I thought that I was Egyptian. You know, when someone would ask me, where are you from? Who are you? I would say, I'm Egyptian. I'm from Egypt. And that was it. That was the beginning and end of it for me. And it took me a really long time to like open myself up to this American identity, to like really own it and take take part in it in a way that doesn't go against my ideals Islamically or culturally as an Egyptian, but that does kind of like help fuse in the reality of my situation, you know. So I think that's a really interesting mentioned there. And you mentioned like professionally and on social media and with family stuff. There's so many, there's so many more little things there. Because for me, I think family interactions were a huge one. You know, my family grew up in Egypt, all of them. You know, so my parents are the only ones that immigrated and came to the US. And so being raised there for them, and then coming here and having children that are raised in the public school system, they had no idea what I was exposed to out there in the world, right? So I had to be a certain way outside the house, you know, with my family, with my friends, and with my teachers, with my teammates on my soccer team. I had to be a certain way to be able to like fit in and navigate the situation. And then when I came home, I had to like take that hat off and put another hat off, the obedient son who is just like all about reading Quran all the time and like praying 5 times a day and like making sure that like all of my family's needs are taken care of and my parents are satisfied and happy with me and their expectations are met. And then again, I leave the next morning to go back to school, and now I have to meet these other people's expectations about who I am and what I have to offer the world. So it really became this like duality of lives and wearing so many different hats to try to figure out like how to be and when to be. So that's yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that. You know, when you guys were talking, it reminded me of something like, I think both Amal and Omar, you both touched on this concept of like, there are almost certain things that belong to certain communities, right? Like in terms of whether it's, okay, I don't know the name of the band, but I'm going to Blink 185. Is that it? Is that the name?
But close.
Blink 82. All right, I'm exposing myself here. But Blink 82, right? And I've never heard Blink 82, but I can relate more to Omar with the country music stuff, right? Like, yeah, country music is, you know, country, like, you know, it has an identity, you know, rednecks listen to it, or, you know, white Southern people listen to it. But I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty, some country songs are really good. And that's, you know, people then end up saying like, oh, you have a little bit of white in you. Or like another funny example is like when you get a pumpkin spice latte, right? It's like that white girl thing, right? So you have a little white girl in you. But I think that's fascinating because I feel like each one of us have some other ethnicity within us just by association with these practices or these things that we like, right? So I guess we're all a little white girl inside of us, and a little, we're a little black inside, and we're a little, Mexican inside, whatever you want to call it. And I found that really interesting to reflect on.
Yeah, I think something that stuck out to me about what both of you guys were saying, the concept of being like a social chameleon, was really sticking out. Just because, like, I myself, I'm not an immigrant, but I am a new Muslim, and I have different friend groups and families, and just putting on the different hats, and like having to navigate that within yourself. It's like, what is the true me? So I think both of your words, they really resonated with me.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing.
I think also on the professional side of things, and I think Emily, you can come on this too. Living in maybe everybody, anyone who's worked in like the corporate setting, or any Muslim person who's working in a corporate setting or outside of like the Muslim community. And Emily, you have a job as like a Muslim mental health program manager, but also you work in other realms. So maybe you can touch on this too. But the culture here is so different. For me to be able to connect with my coworkers, I have to engage with them over a drink. You know what I mean? And that's just not an option. So that really like puts me out so many ways that I can connect with professionally with in that setting. And so, a lot of the times it ends up turning into this like weird, like educational workshop with my coworkers about what Islam is, why I'm not drinking, why I think that getting married is really important, and having kids, and like worshiping God. And then it's just like, it ruins all the fun for everybody else because they're just out there trying to party, and I'm giving them a lesson on Islam. So that's been kind of like an interesting blending of things for me. Even in college and high school, I have this funny story of I went to a friend's house. Thomas Hallman is one of my best friends. He invited me over, and I went to his house, and they had this little house party. This is college, so everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but people are so intrigued by why I'm not drinking. you know, and everyone's trying to offer, you know, drink. And I'm like, I'm good. I just want to be friends with you guys. You know, let's just have a good time. Like, let's do anything other than that. And then it turns into this, like, all of a sudden, like I'm surrounded by people and they're sitting down and I'm telling them about how Moses split the Red Sea and how, you know, like there's all these different things that God is expecting from us, and we should be humble and we should be kind, and then all of a sudden it's like, what the hell am I doing? Where am I? How can I even bring this identity into this space? How can I bring my Muslim identity into this space? And it's a really interesting thing to try to navigate, because then I walk away from the situation just totally confused about like who I am. Am I having a good time? Am I taking away the good time from these people? You know, so that's a really striking kind of juxtaposition that I feel like I've experienced a lot in both the professional and social realm.
Imam Rezk. I'm gonna call you that from now on. Party Imam Rezk.
New party trick. For our next question, when we had our initial meeting, we touched upon this, but I want to hear your thoughts more about, you know, balancing the societal expectations of either collectivism or individualism. You know, as we said, in America, we have this very strong emphasis on the individual and pursuing what's right for you, just for you. But, you know, back in the Middle East, there's more of a community focus of, you know, what's best for the community. So I want to get your thoughts on, you know, what is the right answer between collectivism versus individualism? Is there even a right answer?
You know, I have been thinking a lot just about like I'm going to refer to the Arab dynamic in particular, and I'm pretty familiar with like the Desi community as well and how they approach this. And I think that like, one, the Bosnians call it the golden middle. That's what we are always striving for. So the middle is the right way. And I think moderation, as we know, that was the way of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Yeah. I mean, I see something happening in the East and the West. When it comes to like collectivism, the identity of the individual is so fused into the social structure that there is no removal from it. And I think that this is very contradictory to the idea of like how the Muslim will be in the grave by themselves. You know, and I think that this can often sometimes lead to like not knowing how to make your own decisions without like the almost like, I think you've said it before, Omar, like worshiping the people. You know what I mean? Fearing the people and living under the guise of what the people want and what the family wants. And so these are the cons of the collectivist reality. But then you do have these like family empires, and you have these like my family, I think we have like 72 cousins at this point. My dad is one of 14 children. They had farms, and they had this like when they would come together for a family meal. I mean, this looked like a community potluck at the masjid. You know, it was tons of people, and they had a support system that was so deep and so many generations engaging with each other. So obviously, this is going to be beautiful, because in America, you also have the complete opposite. You know, my mother grew up in small town Iowa, where the family was so fragmented. There was no intergenerational relationship. And you'll see it in certain families, in some places you won't, you know. So this is a generalization, but in a lot of us, in Colorado, where I go, where you go west, because you're escaping what was east, you see this fragmentation, and you see that people are only spending time with people their age. You see that people are only engaging with those who are on the same level as them, who contribute to the individual identity. And I think the missing piece of these multiple generations and these multiple perspectives, and to be a liberal and never be around conservative, you're going to end up with Instagram's politics. You know what I mean? And to be conservative and never be around anyone with a different mentality, like, how can this possibly be good? To not be exposed to the full array, you know? And I think well-roundedness is what we aim for. I quite honestly, like, this might be crazy to say, I think it's the first time I'm saying this out loud, but like, I am very grateful for the individual identity that I was able to cultivate in the United States through my college education, through just being able to like walk the world as a Muslim woman safely. You know, this was so integral to like untangle some of like the cultural barriers and to be able to differentiate between like what's culture, what's religion, you know. But the missing piece of not having my whole family there, or thinking that there's war against the family. That's what a lot of Blink 182's music is actually about, Mohsen. So, but only to like come back and realize that this is it's the collectivism is what's going to save us, and it'll allow us to foster our individualism in a really important way, because one without the other is not well-rounded at all, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you, Amal. I think that you put that very well. I think in the West, there's this like radical idea of like individualism and how that is the way, you know, these like personal liberties and like individual freedoms and being able to do and say and express whatever you want and whatever you like. And I think that's beautiful. I don't think there's necessarily something wrong with that in its totality. I think really it's just the extremism in that regard. When you take it so far as to completely cut ties with the influences of the people closest to you, the influences of the tradition, the influences of the old, you know. And I think we have these ideas now in this individualism that we have to cut ties with the past. You know, we have to cut ties with what was holding us back, you know. And it's so interesting because every time we move forward, it's like every problem that we solve just like breeds more problems. You know, every solution that we have to anything that exists is just breeding more problems. And I was telling Amal about this recently. I was talking about our phones, for example. You know, it's such a joy. It's to see my mom like talking to her family across the ocean. Before, we used to send like cassette tapes back and forth. You know, that would take months to like get a message to and across. And now we can pick up the phone at any moment and connect, and that's such a beautiful thing. But what have our phones done to us as a society? Now we have like all these like mental health issues. We have all these like weird like social we're just like so behind in like social interactions and stuff because everyone just spends so much time on their phones and is so occupied, and now we have problems that we have to solve again because of the solution that we found, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this individualism kind of taking that approach pushes us further in that direction. And I think when the pendulum swings, because we did come from this idea of like collectivism, you know, we came from this like chokehold of like, you cannot be an individual. You are who your family is. You are what the culture is. You are what the religion says you have to be. And we've swung so far to the right, I think in the West, that like the pendulum, when it swings hard, but it always slows down. And inshallah, we can find that middle ground that Ahmed was talking about. We can find this like this way back. There's this author. His name is Wendell Berry. He writes a lot about like culture and agriculture, and he brings it back to the soil and the family and the home and the farm and where it really all started. You know what I mean? And we have this this individualism. It breeds so much waste. I think it breeds so much of our time is wasted because we're only working for ourselves, and we're not sharing in that load together, right? He talks about how the home, it used to be a place of production. You know, we used to cook in home. We used to can our tomatoes for the winter. We used to sew our own clothes. We used to do all these things together, you know, collectively in the home. But now the home has just become this consumptive place, and all we produce out of it is garbage, is trash. You know, we bring and we spend all this money outside to bring these things inside, and then all that comes out at the end of the day from the home is trash. It's garbage. It goes into the landfill. What can we produce within our own homes? What can we do collectively to kind of advance our society, our communities, but without the chokehold of not having our own personal identities? And I think that's the middle ground that Emma was talking about, like being able to express ourselves within this collective group. That is very, very important. And understanding that we are we do come from a history, we do have a background, and we can't dissociate from that. We can't just like let go of that, because now we're rootless. Now we have no foundation. We need to understand where we come from before we try to make ourselves a new identity. You know what I mean? And I think it's really important for us to really take that approach. And that's why I think, you know, bridging the gap, this podcast is really gonna, inshallah, give us a lot of perspectives on that, and take us further into that.
I did have a quick question. I appreciated the perspectives that you guys provided on this. Amal, you talked about the golden path, and Omar, you were talking about you gave the example of the pendulum, which I think is a really good way to visualize this. Where do you think is the current Muslim immigrant generation heading, whether that's youth or some of the older generations? Which way are they more heading? And you guys talked about balance. Do you guys have like any tips or like a practical example of how you can attain that balance?
I think as far as where the Muslim generation is heading, I'm in the field right now. I work for a Muslim youth organization called Muslim Youth for Positive Impact. And we are very deliberately trying to ensure that there are avenues that we can head into for good, for progress, for unity and things like that. And if without these community provisions, without the individuals choosing to embrace the collective and try to be there for the generations, we will not have an identity anymore. That we are in a crisis right now where media in particular, what is on television, what is in our art, and I think that the artists have the biggest power here. Funded, of course, by regimes and the like, but we're in a position right now where our identities are literally changing with the algorithm. They're being shaped by the algorithm. Everything that we are and know and agree with, all our political mindsets, everything we want to dress and wear and be is coming from like what is being pushed out there visually. And this is an agenda. To have a tradition completely disrupts consumer culture. That's the biggest threat to consumer culture, is when we hold on to something that cannot be sold to us and packaged and pristine. They will try to package it. It's like really catchy, like amazing Netflix shows that are like super entertaining, you know. But I think that like we are headed into a situation where one of the signs of the day of judgment is like the people will not know what is in the book, the Quran. These words will be unfamiliar. It is said that like they will look at this book and know it as a book their fathers used to read. That's coming, and we're on the way. And the youth right now, this like massive disconnect with the parents who like want to like my dad tried raising us in the context of like 1950s farming Hamoudi in Syria. Here in America, in Colorado, where like, you know, weed is legalized, and like, you know, like there was such a tension, and the gap, there was no way to even bridge this gap, you know, and that created a generation of rebellion. And I think that's where we are. We're headed into rebellion. And so there are organizations that are trying to build this relationship between all the generations to ensure that we are headed somewhere together, instead of this like fragmented stretch out into different directions, which all, as Omar said, I mean, we become nothing but consumers, you know, in this regard, and we're given what the television hands us. It's a little haunting, actually. But I think that there's another question about balance. I don't know, Omar, if you got any tips for some balance there.
Yeah, the balance is hard. On a very personal level, I think kind of like bridging those two divides for me, you know, having this outside life, outside of my family, trying to build my individual identity in this like sea of people that were very different from me, and then coming home and trying to just be what my parents wanted me to be. You know, I used to always blame them for like pushing so hard and just like, you know, not seeing me or understanding me, or like taking the time to really appreciate like who I am and where I come from and stuff like that. But how could they? You know what I mean? How could they, with all of the baggage that they brought with them? That my dad came from Egypt. He was a scientist. He had his master's degree. He was pursuing his PhD, and he came to America and spent the first 3 years here delivering pizzas door to door, bussing tables, like washing floors. This man who had an esteemed job and role and position in his own country is now as basically like a worker, like a slave for these white people, you know, and that's such a you know, something to go through. You know, I can't imagine myself like picking up and just like going to China and just like bussing tables and trying to understand like how this world works here and then try to make a way. Looking back now, like utmost respect for all of what my parents have done. And not to say that like their shortcomings did not affect me in this way, but how could they have known? You know, how could they have known how to raise a child in this country? And so when I think about, inshallah, like raising my own children, I am worried, I am scared, but I do think that we have a unique perspective here because we're bridging the gap, we're bridging the divide, we're trying to find how we can be individuals in the collective and make our way in this society. And I think I went on this like personal journey of like convergence, you know, and it was a lot of clashes. There was a lot of clashes. I tried to bring the outside world into the home. I wanted to show my family like what it is that's out there. You don't have to be afraid all the time. You don't have to be worried that I'm gonna go and like, you know, into this melting pot and just like dissolve into nothing. Right. And America, you know, as a melting pot, it's a beautiful thing. It's bringing so many cultures and traditions together, but at the same time, you end up with this like dissolution of our identities. We end up just becoming watered down into this individual, this quest for everybody's like individualism. But we all end up just doing the same thing. We're all just like buying the same brands and eating at the same places and engaging on the same platforms. Where's the real individualism? You know what I mean? What parts of our identities are we really expressing, right? So I think this convergence of our realities and this collectivism and this individualism, we really need to find a way to bring them together a little bit better. And I think a big part of that is just having difficult conversations with the generations before us and after us. You know, I have a younger brother. He's 4 years younger than me. And I think, you know, that's not young enough. But when I think about like the kids of the coming generation, like the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, like what can we tell them now to set them up so that they can be equipped with what they need to be themselves and also like take on what's coming at them. You know what I mean? And how can we learn from the generation that came before us on how to hold on to our tradition, how to like maintain this identity, and how to like hold on to family and our land and just like be this collective, you know, work as a community. And I think that really it starts with these conversations. We have to have these tough conversations on an intergenerational level. And again, bridging the gap. Kassidy and Mohsen, you guys are doing it. We're doing it right here.
That'd be a nice legacy to be known for that. But hopefully we're just one cog in the whole melting pot that I think we're all working towards the same thing. And I think this kind of leads us straight into this larger issue on, you know, Muslims and non-Muslim lands. It's a difficult issue because now we have to deal with questions like, you know, we hear these things like true Islam versus cultural Islam, right? What are the Muslim priorities here versus the Muslim priorities back home? You know, we have to deal with these, you know, I come from this creed in the religion, right? I come from this madhab, I come from this sect of Islam. And there's so many questions that have arisen because of this melting pot status that we have in America. So maybe you guys can talk about a little bit more about navigating faith in America, in the West in general.
Omar, do you want to go first?
Sure. I was kind of thinking about what we were talking about just before this. There's you know, navigating this religion in this country is very difficult. I was telling you the story about, you know, Moses splitting the Red Sea at a college party. That's a hard thing to do, you know. But the reality is we are surrounded by non-Muslim people. And when you look at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Quran was revealed and Islam was like composed into this and packaged into this deliverable to the people, what did the Sahaba do? They spread across the earth to deliver the message to the people, right? They went to China, they went to Europe, they went to Africa, they went to all these different places where it was not the land of the Muslims, to deliver the message and to make sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message is heard. And so I think because we are in the land of the non-Muslims, our responsibility to uphold the standards of Islam and to give this da'wah is so much greater, right? Why come to this land if we're not going to spread the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And why come to this land if we are just going to dissolve ourselves into this, this identity that is not ours? And I think that with a lot of different like immigrant families, you see it all the time where, the father and the mother will bring their children to this country and then like wake up one morning after their son or daughter did something like atrocious in their eyes, and they're like, we're going back home. They pack their bags, and all of a sudden it's like a total reality shift, and the kids are like no longer in like public school in Durham, North Carolina. They're like in this like Islamic school in Egypt, and like what like, can you imagine like what's happening to the kid now? They're now just like swinging again. This pendulum just keeps swinging so hard. But I don't think that's really always the solution. I think we can fortify ourselves here. I think we can make sure that we keep our priorities in check, and we maintain what the real mission is. If we're in the land of the non-Muslims, our responsibility is to give da'wah. And I'm not saying like go knock door to door and like be a Jehovah's Witness of Islam. I'm saying like just uphold ourselves with the ideals of what it means to be a Muslim. And these conversations happen so naturally. You know what I mean? When you can uphold yourself with these standards, someone sees you at work and they're like, they ask you, why don't you drink, or why do you have to like step away for like 15 minutes to go pray, or why are you not eating today? There's so many opportunities for us to give da'wah, and I think that's our responsibility here in this case. So Amal, I don't know if you had any ideas there.
Yeah. So my family was one of those families who my dad picked us up, moved us to Syria for 3 years. So that, and we were not the only ones in our community. It was so reactionary. It was tough. All we wanted was ranch dressing and Toys R Us when we were there. That's all I wanted, at least, But I think Omar, I want to like touch on the dawah piece for a second. And then I want to go into sort of like Islam in America, what it actually means. And I think I've seen dawah in multiple ways. And I have seen it as almost like I've seen dawah used as a way to look down and as a way to like we are better and we are more intellectual and we are more superior, and Islam inherently in itself is the way. And I have no doubt in my mind with the communities that I have engaged with, particularly the non-Muslim communities, that Islam is so desperately needed in America. Islam is for the poor and the oppressed. Islam is for the lost. That is what this deen is for. The first who converted were women and orphans, and it was youth. It was those slaves. Islam was for that population, and you see it in this like super like intellectual, prestigious realm in America, and it's very, very hostile sometimes. I see those YouTube videos of like the guys in the parks that are like just like an innocent white lady talking, and then they're like, "Who's your God?" And she's like scared, and it's intense. And I think when we approach it like that, I think it takes away a little bit from the experience of finding Islam for yourself too. I think we as born and raised Muslim, I don't know about what you pinpoint yours, Omar. I think you did tell me once, but like we have a journey to take our shahada too. I think that I officially took my shahada when I was like, I think I was 20 or 21. And I was private Islamic school all the way growing up. And I am a Muslim. I dedicated myself. I chose to wear hijab when I was 11 and have never taken it off since. You know, I've always committed to this deen as an identity. But when I was around 2021, that is when I found it as like my spiritual proclamation, you know. And Islam has different facets. You have it as like this identity, this political identity. I picked hijab because I was like, these are my people, and I will stand up and you will not oppress us. You know, we're 9/11 kids. We're the kids who literally like we had FBI SWAT team going through our mosques, knocking down bookshelves. The FBI sitting outside of the homes of the Muslimin, getting us paranoid and stuff. We had to shape up our identity and our reality around this. And I think for a long time, like when it's identity based, this kind of ties into the individualism. It is somewhat in response to. And so for a long time, Islam was somewhat of like a reaction to Islamophobia. I built my knowledge and my dawah around Islamophobia. Let me tell you about how Muslim women aren't oppressed like you think they are. Let me tell you about how the Prophet actually says this instead of this. But then like I hit 20, I found the depth of it. And all of this is to say that I think when we walk this land, we have the message, but we need to receive the message too. You know, the way my mom found Islam and her relationship with it looks a lot different than someone who's maybe born and raised their whole lives in it. The nature of the gossip, the nature of the curiosity, the nature of like how hard my mom would wrestle to pronounce ayn and ghain and dald. That's so much of a gift, you know, than to just like, we have the answer. You know.
Yeah, I definitely hear you, Amal. I think when we go back to Egypt and I go to any majority Muslim country, it's so interesting because the kids there, this generation of youth that's growing up, the world has become so globalized. You know, everyone's hearing everything that's happening outside now, and a lot of these Western ideals and things are definitely infiltrating into the societies. You have this idea of like an assumed Muslim. You were born that way. You kind of like, you just are surrounded by it. You hear the adhan wherever you go. It's easy for you to just like, you know, be assumed Muslim. But in America, like you have to work for it, because if you don't fortify yourself against like what is around you, you will lose your deen, you will lose your faith, and you will not be able to hold on to it. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us that it will come a time where it's like holding on to a hot coal, right? And who wants to hold on to a hot coal? You know, only someone who understands the value of it. And how can we understand the value of it? We have to become students of knowledge. We have to understand it for ourselves. Like Amal was saying, we have to take our personal shahadas and we have to like choose this religion. And we can't be just an assumed Muslim. We can't just take on the label and the name, because it doesn't mean much if you don't believe in it truly and you don't learn it and you don't practice it. And then that's where, you know, that's what ends up carrying into this like responsibility of the dawah. I think it's less so like trying to push this forward, but really figure it out for ourselves. We can't be good examples if we don't act in the ways that we are wanting other people to act. And you know, this idea of ascension, I was telling Amal about this. This is a like with ihsan, you know, when we're climbing this ladder of ihsan, with everything that we achieve, you know, there's a weight lifted from us. There's this like, you know, I did it, I've accomplished this thing. But what we don't realize is that next there's like this bigger burden that comes out of it. This bigger burden is born, and now we have this bigger responsibility. You know, now that we've learned our Muslim identity in this country, now our responsibility is to reflect that in all of our actions and all of our relationships and all of our things, and present that to the world around us. You know what I mean? So I think that we do have this very important responsibility to do this, because otherwise, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? Why are we putting ourselves in this position if we can't uphold what we know is true? And
I mean, I would throw in there, Omar, though, like as well, like, and if we've been talking about this too, humility, and there's like My country has a war back home. Afghanistan's got a war. Palestine is in war. You know, like Libya was in war. There are so many wars back home. And then we come here. I think I am thinking about the older generation right now. So when I'm framing this critique, I think I am addressing sort of a more, I'm going into exactly what we're trying to like untangle here, but it's wild because we are coming here with this beautiful deen and it is the answer. But then it's like whatever we did back home wasn't right. Whatever we were doing in this regard, something has to change. And we are here as immigrants being embraced in a non-Muslim land with a religion, and we either we keep it the same and bring that tribalism here and bring that sort of like oppression here, or I don't want to call it evolution, right? Because we're not trying to do no bid'ah here, you know, that's a big trigger word, but we need to heal whatever it was that broke or cracked apart these lands that we came from. And it's so tricky because you see them just like Hako, we're trying to hold on to our faith and our deen. We're trying to hold on to our cultures and our pride. It's humiliating to come to America and be mistreated by these people and shamed. And we're having a mental health event, and the Afghans are telling me stories, dude. The bullying crisis is so severe, and it is one of the biggest factors leading to Muslim youth suicide, which is so not talked about and so prevalent in the community. And it's like we're not just navigating like the deen, we're navigating like our egos and our pride and our dignity as well in the context of this land. It's so tricky, and it comes with so much baggage.
Yeah,
Literal sense.
I feel you. I feel you. This idea of humility has come up a lot in recently in conversation and life. I realized something. We haven't talked about it much so far in these conversations, but there's something to be said about the things that we're fighting against. The things that we're fighting against and trying to fortify ourselves against are things that we deeply desire. You know what I mean? The desire to be like seen, the desire to be liked by these people, the desire to like go after all these like fitnas that are out there. You know what I mean? I want to be cool and like drink with the cool kids. I want to be like, you know, cool and popular on social media. I'm going to post whatever, you know, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to be this. I want to be that. And it's like there's deep desires, you know, and maybe, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with different sides, you know, with different sides of our nafs. And for anyone who's like kind of dove into like what the nafs is, what the self is, you know, there's different parts to it. And one of them is nafs al-ammara bis-su', the one that is inclined towards bad or towards evil, right? And we have that in ourselves, you know, and if we don't reconcile that and accept that about ourselves, we will never be able to like, you know, move past it, because right now we are so driven by our desires that you're right, we need to humble ourselves and realize that the problem is within ourselves. You know, a lot of the times there's this outside structure that's attacking us, there's this outside world that's like infiltrating, but we also are so receptive to it because we want that. We want to be in these positions, we want to be like popular and cool and like, you know, kind of take on these parts of our identity so that we can, you know, feel good. And ultimately it's the gratification from it doesn't last, you know what I mean? And so this dopamine kick that we get out of it, we just need more and more and more and more and more. It's a never-ending cycle. And I think that you know, this all started with the humility. I think that's what the focus should be here, is that we really do need to humble ourselves. We're not better than anybody else. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in his like final address to the people that, you know, aside from like, you know, he said to take care of your families and to take care of your women, but he also told us that beware of bigotry and racism. There's no Arab that is better than any other person. You're not better based on your identity of your color or where you come from. You're better based on your piety, based on what's inside of your heart. And if we can't prove to ourselves or to Allah that we are sincere in our actions, then we can't, you know, stand and walk walk with any sort of
Mm.
we can't walk on this earth any way but humbly. You know what I mean? And I think that that's really going to help drive us towards this, finding these answers and having these conversations and talking about how to converge on these identities and learn about how the individualism can fit into the collective and how the collective can take care of the individual.
Can I throw in like some controversy?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love controversy.
Yeah, and dude, I had this experience last year when it came to like my spiritual, I want to say, I don't make religion and spirituality distinct in this. They are part of the equation, but I think religion is the more mechanical practice and spirituality is of the heart. And I think spiritually, 20, I already told you the story. I really took my shahada, but last year was the first time, and Cassie, if you got something to say on this too, as a Muslim, but last year was the first time I taught this class, not called American Muslim writers, it was called Muslim American writers. And the distinction was profound because I was in a room with women who, some of them hadn't even heard Surah Al-Fatiha for 20 years. Some of them were praying in mosques where the men and the women stood next to each other. It was all completely mixed, like the tradition was out the window, but minus the praying itself. And I remember it was the first time in my life, I was 26 years old. It was the first time that I finally allowed myself as a Muslim woman to look inside the Muslim community and its treatment of women. It was the first time. My whole life has been built up against like, no, Islam does not oppress women, and we have to respond to what these Islamophobes are saying. And no, I chose to wear hijab and all of this stuff. And like, yes, in and of itself, absolutely. This is the one that gave women rights and inheritance and honor in a way that these were men burying their daughters alive. But it was the first time that I actually turned and looked inside the house and I was like, yo, it's a mess. It's a mess the way the women's situation is. No wonder we're having an identity crisis right now with what happened in Iran. No wonder this is confusing and hard because I'll like wear hijab and like go into the world and people will be like, take your rag head off, and this and that. Then I'll come home and I'll have like a little hair like sticking out, and and the YouTube comments are like from Muslims are just so obscene and horrendous. And it's like that humility as well. It's like it's so hard because the problem is Islamophobia and us against them and non-Muslim lands. But then what is happening in the community, dude? Domestic violence within the Muslim community is off the charts. It is off the charts, man. And it's not just like families, it's like leadership, and it's like being a Muslim woman and navigating womanhood in non-Muslim lands is so hard because it's like, it's so much easier to just take it off and like look cute and like be embraced and be valued and valued. And, it's a whole other thing to unpack, but it's complicated, Omar. And just the way, like you said, like just the internal and the external dynamic and just like how we got to be straight up about the problem, because otherwise we can blame the Islamophobes all we want, but the greatest threat to Islam is Muslims. Is that a hadith or is that, I don't remember, but this is something that historically has been said, that the greatest threat to Islam is Muslims.
For sure. And I think going back to like the cultural Islam, the true Islam, I think that's kind of where a big part of the problem is. I think growing up in a majority Muslim country, one can kind of take this assumption that everything that they've learned is from the deen, but then you realize that like, wait, even when sometimes my mom and my dad will be talking to me and they'll be like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And I'm like, I don't know. This is not haram, is it? Like, is that against the religion? I'm not. They're like, yeah, of course, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, where? Show me, please. Show, because honestly, I didn't learn that from the religion. It sounds like this is coming from the culture. And if that's coming from the culture, what we need to understand is that this culture can be right, can be true, can be accurate, and it can be applied to the individual who adopts it. And I adopt a lot of the culture, but I don't want to adopt that one. That one is not for me, not because I don't value it and I don't think it's a viable way of life, but I learned a different way, and I grew up in a different way. So this is the type of culture that I have adopted in this way. But when it comes to the religion, they don't butt heads. When it comes to the true like religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that he created us from so many different clays and so many different parts of this world, so that we can get to know each other. So that he created differences as a mercy. He didn't create differences as something to fight each other over. And I think within our Muslim community, we ostracize ourselves, and other people, and kind of like segment, even within culturally, you know what I mean? Like, and the madhahib and like the different traditions. There's the Desi masjid, there's the Arab masjid, there's the black masjid, there's the gay masjid. There's all these there's all these different divides on so many different levels, and we don't really appreciate what the religion is actually here to do. It's here to bring us together. We can be individuals, but we have to respect each other's individualism to be a collective. You can't be a collective if you're pushing everyone out and not inviting them in because you don't like the way they look, the way they talk, the way they smell. It doesn't, you can't actually thrive in that type of environment. So,
or we invite them in, let them convert to Islam, and then close the door from that. Converts are leaving Islam just as fast as they're coming into Islam. The recent statistics have shown. So it's remarkable how tricky it is to have the truth in our hands. And
I want to eat.
All right, I have another generation in the room. This is my little brother, everybody.
There we go.
Look, the youth.
This is for you.
I'll be there soon, okay? All right.
You said something very that resonated with me a little bit. This idea of obviously this is a generalization, but if we some of the countries back home from where some of the immigrant Muslim generations are coming, they have war going on, right? Whether that's Palestine, whether that's Libya, whether that's Syria, whether that's Afghanistan, and it's almost like a duality, right? Where you have physical war going on over there, and then when you come here, it's a mental war that starts to go on, and it's almost like. It reminds me of this thing. It's where in our religion we pray for everything. Like it's better for us to just have some bodily harm or some test that has to do with us, like our world, our jobs. That's better than having a test with our religion, because that's the worst thing. And this is I took this kind of from Ibn Abbas, where he said along the lines of it's better to have a test in your worldly life than it is to have in your religious or spiritual life, right? Because when we start doubting our religion, that's the biggest thing for us. And so I feel like here in America, you have a lot of things, whether it's atheism, whether it's other religions that kind of influence our patterns and our behaviors and even our thoughts. And I know, Omar, you mentioned the gay mosque, right? And I want to add a little bit more controversy here. And how do we tackle that, right? How do we tackle when your friend comes up to you and they're Muslim and we're all living in this collective Muslim identity, but part of that collective Muslim identity in the West, increasingly we're seeing part of this collective identity is being choosing your own sexual orientation, right? Choosing your own sexual gender, right? Or your gender. So how do we deal with that as Muslims? And how do we deal with things like that's a gay mosque, right? A gay imam is leading it, or a woman is leading Jummah, or everyone's kind of praying alongside each other, men and women, even though that's not against culture, that's against the tradition of Islam, right?
Dude, I think you're entering into a realm here where I feel like we need a mufti or some high level scholar to help us unpack this. I feel like this is such a taboo topic that even some of the biggest shuyukh and imams in this country are having a hard time with it. You know what I mean? Because they didn't learn it. We don't have a lot of examples in the tradition, and the ones that we do, we don't talk about them. You know what I mean? And you get surprised sometimes to kind of see some of the stories that are out there. And one of the few stories that was ever shared to me about this from the Deen was that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and told him, I'm married, but I'm not attracted to my wife, and I'm not attracted to women at all. In fact, I feel like I am attracted to men. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told him, like, he asked him, what do I do? What do I do? He said that just, it's better for you to do this. It's better for you to stay with your wife and to have children and to take on this life than it is to do the other. That was his advice to him. It's so simple, so plain. And this is a test for you. This is a struggle, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you if you overcome the struggle. If we frame it that way, it really helps to kind of mitigate some of the attacks that come out towards the Muslims who feel like they have this sexual orientation, or they have this part of their identity that is so taboo and so against Islam. It's not against Islam. It's not. And the reality is, Islam leaves room for every worldview to exist within it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. He knows what we are and what we do and what we are capable of, right? And so giving everyone an opportunity to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they are and seek guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they are. If you truly accept Islam and you believe and you have these struggles that you're dealing with, and this is not for me. I'm not being attacked by society for being gay. So I don't really truly know the struggle here, but if you come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with humility and understanding that this religion is the true religion, and you ask for guidance and you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this easy for you, I think that's, we should leave room for that, instead of just attacking people and telling them that they're not Muslim for feeling this way or wanting or desiring certain things. Because like we said before, we all have desires. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with carnal desires. We're out here just trying to fight against them, what I mean, within ourselves. And as a society, I don't think, it goes, it's interesting because, I may be saying stuff here that I'm not really qualified to say, and maybe I don't have the full perspective, but, the pride marches and stuff like that, I feel like we have this interesting unity, this assumed unity. Some people who are like transgender, part of the LGBTQ community, where they feel like they're the same as like the Muslims because they're also oppressed in this country, and I feel like that's not really my place to stand next to. I can't honestly go and go to these marches and say like I stand with you for social justice, because this doesn't fall in line with like my identity as a Muslim, and it doesn't fall in line with like what I'm seeking to promote as the ideal for like the status quo, right? But I do see like the burden that it has on people who feel this way, right? And so we need to respect the social reality and respect the individual who is struggling with these things, but not to the point where we like stand next to them and say, yeah, we'll fight with you towards this goal that we don't actually believe in or buy into. You know what I mean? So that's kind of my perspective.
I'd love to kind of like go a little more macro too, if that's all right. And I think that the fact of the matter is the conversation of homosexuality, the prevalence of it, it's on TV. You've got 5-year-olds that think they're gay right now. It's in little children's books. It's so prominent everywhere, right? This could not have arrived unless we as a society embraced zina in the first place. Man and woman having sex on a big movie screen, that is haram. But we normalized that, and we accepted it, and we embraced it, and we took what belonged into the bedroom and infused it into our media. So what was once sacred and private is now a public matter. Zina between a man and a man on a big movie screen. There's that new movie that just came out. It's the first of its kind to hit the big screens. I don't even know what it's called, but I saw the commercial and I was like, whoa. It's the same haram. It's more deviant, sure, and it's newer, and it brings to the mind some sort of like fantasy realm that again belongs in the bedroom onto the big screen. And so now we are being forced to take again something that is sacred and private. There were matters that were in the home of Rasulullah ﷺ that people would come outside and deal with in the Prophet's home. There were things that were private, and we have completely publicized sexuality and turned it, and the older generation, this is a critique on that. A lot of the women that I grew up with didn't know anything until their wedding night. Or we learned from pornography, or, you know, or television taught us. And so like sexuality in general is an issue. And like when we focus solely on this form that is considered deviant in the world, we are not realizing that we have, as Muslims in America too, in particular, accepted zina between men and women on the screen and in the realm of society, and we're comfortable with it and it's normal. But then we look at this as if it's something different. This was born from this, you know, and it's just so there's so much to be unpacked here. And you're so right, Omar, definitely having a scholar who like knows about this stuff would help to go into the sharia. But like this is, I came from the poetry community, so I was deeply exposed to it. You know, I used to throw protests for Syria, and the only community that would show up, honestly, was the LGBTQ community. There were, and it, for me, it was like, I'm not going to sit here and their arrogance is what's not forgiven in Islam. To have a mustard ounce of arrogance, and this is a product of society and a generation of fatherless children and a media that is literally infusing some of the sickest ideas into the minds of children at such a young age, and everyone is confused. They are confused. We are all so confused about our sexuality in this country, and not so much about what our gender preferences, but even like intimacy between a husband and his wife. You know what I mean? Like these matters, again, which are sacred, and there's rahma in them, and there's like rituals in Islam around them, are so, it's like turning it inside out. And now like we as a society are dealing with something so private as the bedroom. So all this is to say that like I think we have to once again take the individual and the collective approach when we are addressing these things. And when I meet a new Muslim who is struggling with this, I tell them like, protect yourself. We can't change the deen in the way that we want. We can't. This is what America's for, you know. But we have to look at the big picture. We have to look at what this does to generations down the line. We have to look at what this does to the family structure. We have to look at like what does the complete elimination of sort of the sanctity, I would say, what will that actually do and lead with? We're very confused right now, everyone, including, you know, so as a conclusion.
I think you're super right about that. We definitely took a tangent here. Mohsen, I feel like you're really loving this.
Why did you open up?
No, that's, but you're right. Hopefully maybe one day we'll do an episode just kind of dedicated to this. You're right. This needs a lot of unpacking. It is definitely one of the, I think, most important topics in American, or I should say Muslim American. So that's another thing I learned today. Muslim American instead of American Muslim, Muslim American identities. And so hopefully one day we can unpack that and really go through it. But just returning back to topic, and I'm going to hand it over to Kassidy.
Yeah, so you know, that was a heavy conversation, and one that needed to be, and also needs to be had. But you know, what I was getting from all of your words over this episode is kind of like, it's all essentially like a balancing act, right? Like, you know, putting on, you know, one show for the family, one show for the friends, you know, work, everything. And, you know, also, you know, as Omar, you stated, like getting older and having the utmost respect for your parents, and, you know, what they went through, and, you know, their own balancing act, you know, trying to, you know, come here and raise a family when you're older, and everything is a task I can't even imagine, you know, for myself, or even my parents. And evidently, you know, this takes a toll on the individual. It takes a toll on the family, and you know, it leads into this confusion about your own identity, which we're you know trying to unpack here. And this is, you know, this leads me to ask something that I think needs to be spoken about, because I feel like it's, you know, even in my own family, you know, my family is not Muslim, you know, we're not immigrants, but it's still something that, you know, even we don't talk about. So like I can only imagine. But you know, let's talk about generational trauma. How do we demystify that? How do you deal with it? we'll probably need another episode on just this topic, but it's a topic that needs to be talked about. So let's open it up now.
Wow.
The questions you guys are asking are like waterfall questions.
Yeah, Mohsen and I are pretty good at that.
Generational trauma. I think when I was growing up as I was a kid, I was like, mental health wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even something to consider. It was just there was duty and there was other people to take care of, right? And so I needed to make sure that everyone around me was satisfied with the version of who I was at any given time, right? And when I look at like what was passed down to me in terms of like trauma, well, one, I had a very unique circumstance at home where like I was my like parents' like marriage counselor at the age of like 12, right? Onward. And that was interesting because now I'm subjected to things that I should not even be in the realm of and should not be able to understand. But now I'm trying to help them figure out the things that they went through, right? And not really unpacking the burdens that have been put on me because of what they went through. And then that was just all very recent for me that I started to unpack what that really looked like. And I think we should all really take a step back and look at what it is that was passed down to us, not just in knowledge and wealth and culture, but like trauma. What happened to them on their way here? Why is there so much pressure from my dad for me to achieve? Like looking at his story, it makes sense. Now that I understand like where he came from and what he had to do to get here, that for me to like go on my own individual like mission and not be so like career oriented and not have like a plan for like 25 years and not be married already and have kids already and all this stuff that's like coming down on me. It's like, well, Baba, and like slow down, like why do you feel this way about me? And why do I feel this way about myself over and over and over again? And why do I feel like I'm not living up to anybody's expectations? And why do I feel like I have to live up to your expectations? You know what I mean? There's so much of that. And I think maybe I'm just going on a tangent here and not being very specific, but this generational trauma, I think is something that plagues us, and it's like a silent killer. We're not thinking about it. It's just in the back of our minds, and it shapes who we are without us even knowing. So I think someone who maybe has a little bit of a better understanding of this is Amal. I think she's, she talks about identity and actually teaches workshops about identities. And I think she has a better grasp on this. So I'll leave it to you.
No, I think you like gave the full like spectrum of just the reality. And there's so many dynamics. I will say this. I believe that our biggest problem right now is that we have not addressed our trauma. That is the biggest problem in the Ummah right now. And I say that with confidence because that trauma is seeping out into our treatment of women, our treatment of like other races and other cultures. And it really makes sense. How do we demystify it, Kassidy? I heard a quote the other day. They said the problem is not finding the answer, it's facing the answer. And alhamdulillah, I come from a unique perspective, my mother's side and my father's side. Two different flavors of trauma, but all trauma. My mom's side, there was alcoholism for several generations. There's gambling, lots of addiction, child abuse, sexual abuse was very common in the city she grew up with. This is the American reality. This is the American trauma, right? And my father's side, military occupation by France in the 1920s installed a dictatorship regime, right? The whole Middle East was chopped up and cut up by like white imperialists who came in and almost like humiliate. I mean, there were mass rapes in the street of grown men in front of their families. There was a deep integrated humiliation that came as a result of this imperialism. And it is something that, like, again, I'm gonna go to a somewhat tangential thing, but like, if you look at, for example, homophobia in Jamaica in particular, Jamaica was one of the places that they would season the slaves before sending them to the United States. There was part of the seasoning process was literally, and trigger warning, I guess, but there would be mass rape of men until they cried. That was the process. So homophobia in Jamaica is part of a generational trauma. So if you go back to the Middle East, this occupation, this shame, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, what did they have to do with that? They had to compensate. So how did they do that? They built an honor-based system. Family reputation was what you had to give you honor, because in the eyes of the world, you have been broken down and shamed. We have to remember the role of imperialism in this, but we also have to remember that we infuse these practices in how we treat our children. Self-invalidation, shame, suppression. This comes from the occupation, but it is enforced by mothers and fathers inside the home. And we're working on it here in Colorado. It's tough, man. This is history, and it lives in our biology. Stress, anxiety. A mother who is anxious in a war zone is going to give that baby way more cortisol in the belly, so that kid is more susceptible to anxiety as a survival measure. This is so spiritual and physiological and intellectual and cultural that, like, this generational trauma, it is everything. It is everything. And how do we heal it? We heal it with, definitely not shame. We're trying to shame the trouble out of us, and you end up with like women who have psychosis, and they're like, nah, they're just possessed by the jinn, hide them. The first mental institutions in the world were founded by Muslims, and they didn't look like American Horror Story. Yo, they were literally beautiful courtyard. They were windows facing the courtyards in the office. And so how do we demystify it? We tell the truth about it, and we admit the fact that we are sick right now. The ummah is sick right now, dude. Fathers taking it out on their kids and on their wives giving birth to babies from the stress. These children hate themselves, and when they have kids, they teach those kids to hate themselves, and we don't even realize it's happening. It's devastating us. And like, my message to the American Muslims who are of sound mind and want to fix the planet: heal your trauma, heal it. And you have to start inside. You have to know your demons. And sorry, I know I'm ranting, and I know I've been doing that a lot this time.
This is great. This
is very hard hitting. Like, this is giving me chills right now.
The truth, man. And we're all in it together, and we know it because we're hurting from it. So, but I believe it's the solution. I really,
I hear you loud and clear on that. As you were talking, I was thinking about some of the issues with like why it gets so difficult for us to like actually even address our traumas and approach them. It does affect every single part of us, like our outward appearance, our physiology, like our gut wrenching, like, you know, these feelings, where are they coming from, and how can we address them when all we want to do is stop feeling them? The problem is we have to feel them, and we have to figure out where they're coming from. And it's such an attack on our like self-worth, you know what I mean? And it really takes us away from being able to be confident within ourselves. And like we just become we become like slaves to this like master of shame and master of like trauma. That's just like, whatever direction it points, that's where we'll go, because we just want to get away from it. You know what I mean? And if you shame a child for something that is not to shame them for, they will push harder. The rebellion will happen. And I've seen it so many times. I've done it myself. You know what I mean? If my parents want me to do this, I'm going to do the opposite, just to show them that this is another way. You know what I mean? And it's like, this whole system of oppression that is in the background that we don't, it's hiding, it's not out in the open. And when we don't talk about it and we just run away from it constantly, we're perpetuating it, and we're not going to break the cycle that way. So talking about it is so important, and it's going to make a world of difference, you know, as we move forward. And inshallah, like the generations to come, we have a vocabulary now that we can use. Mm-hmm. We have a methodology that we can use to approach these types of conversations. And really, it's just about getting people to the table. bringing the individual back to the collective and understanding that we can support each other through this stuff. I think for me, the biggest way to do that is to rebuild the home, rebuild the structure of the home, and give back the power, not to the streets, not to the corporations, not to the governments, but bring the power back into the home and into the communities, and let that be the source of healing. And I think that there's no better way to do that than with food on the table, grown in your own garden. But I think that's where these conversations can happen. And inshallah, like we have so many tools now as this like diverse community and generation of immigrants and of Muslims in this society. We have so many different perspectives now. We can finally bring them to the table and invite others and make them feel welcome and heard and felt. So right. I'm optimistic.
That's from what I'm understanding, I guess a good answer to this demystifying question is, don't go around it, go through it, right? You gotta, as you said, you gotta feel the feelings, right? You gotta just accept the truth, as Amal was saying, and you gotta deal with it head on and overcome it, so we can, this trauma that as you guys were describing, it seeps through generations, can stop. We can plug it. We can plug the leak, and we'll end, inshallah, with this. I know I've kept you guys for so long. I'm enjoying this conversation. We could go on for days. I have my coffee ready and everything, but at the same time, one of the things about our generations is that we don't like long things, right? I guess one of the differences, back then they could, one of the examples I always think is like Qawwalis. So Qawwalis is somewhat of like a Indo-Pak origin, and they used to be like 16, 17, 18-minute long songs, and they would just listen to them, and we barely can listen to a 3-minute song now, right? So if we were to kind of summarize this episode, what is one piece of advice you would give to the younger you, and perhaps through that to the young Muslim immigrant generations?
Tough question, I know. Very tough question.
I'm gonna put this on you, Amal. You go first. I have to think about this.
When the younger me and the younger Muslim generations, it all comes down to this right now. We're both speechless, even though we've been
right
for an hour and a half.
maybe that is the answer, just speechless. It's just silence. It's just reflecting within rather than without.
I think a big part of what's helped me on a very personal level through this journey, and I think I'm very blessed for this, and I realize it as I travel the world and see other communities and groups of friends and people, is finding your tribe. Find the people who will support you for who you are and help you develop and grow in this collective. And because we can't do it alone, we can't walk through this earth alone. And the people who are closest to us, sometimes they don't know how to help, i.e. our families. And I think that's because of this generational gap and because of this cultural gap. So find your people, and I think this group of people here, these 4 people, we align in so many different ways. Why? Because we see the world from the varying perspectives that we bring to the table, and we're willing to listen, and so that, I think that would be my biggest piece of advice right now. That's what's coming to me, is find your tribe, find your people, find the ones that you want to be like, find the ones that you want to grow with, and stick with them. Don't let them go. Hold on to them and encourage them and have them encourage you.
Thank you.
I love that. And Omar, that was definitely one of the most important journeys I ever took, was to find my tribe. I think from my advice, I heard recently that the ego is an immune system, and the ego will do whatever it can to protect you from pain and shame and exposing your darkness and your demons to the light. We need to look inside of ourselves more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. If you want to see a better world, you have to go inside, and it's going to be ugly. It's gonna be ugly. You're gonna hate what you see. But if you want a better world, the journey begins inward. And I assure you, you will see that changing the world is capable by starting with your own. So that's my
Those are
advice.
both. No,
Yeah.
those are both
And I feel
beautiful.
I feel like they can even work together, right? Omar, you focus more on the external aspect, right? Finding that tribe, and then Amal, you focus on the internal, and together, hopefully, we can not only recognize our own identities, but strengthen them. And part of that strengthening process is going through the ugly, as you describe it, going through, the horrors that we often hide, and the demons that we hide within ourselves. Well, Barakallahu feekum. Thank you guys so much for this wonderful conversation. I know I'm gonna probably I have to listen to this anyways, because for editing processes. But other than that, I'm also gonna listen to this a bunch of times, I think, because there were so many things that I want to just reflect on more personally. What about you, Kassidy?
Yeah, I know that I'm going to be thinking about this conversation probably for days, if not weeks. And it really, pushed me to really realize that like I need to reflect within my own self. And just, I want to thank both of you for, being our inaugural episode. This is so amazing, and your words are going to change lives, inshallah. So like
Sure.
I'm speechless actually.
And that's the point of conversations, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as Kassidy said, you'll think about it for days and weeks. And if there's a conversation that people are thinking about it for days and weeks, that usually means that there's gonna be hopefully some change. And that's what the conversations we want to try to get on these podcasts. So well done to you guys for inspiring at least me and Kassidy, right? And I know so many other people that will listen to this, inshallah. All right, I know, Omar, you have to head
You gotta
out, so
run,
we're not
so
gonna.
hold you any
We're not gonna.
longer.
All right, Jazakallah khair, everybody.
But
Assalamu
thank you
alaikum.
guys
guys.
so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. We appreciate it.
Have a good one.